The night she left, I was standing in the kitchen arguing with a voicemail. I replayed it 3 times, trying to hear what she meant instead of what I wanted to hear. Her voice was steady, almost calm. "I can't do this anymore," she said. "I feel invisible." I remember thinking it was dramatic, that we'd talk when she got home. She never did. We met when I was broke and loud and full of plans. She liked that I listened to her stories about work, about her mother's illness, about the little things that made her day feel heavy. Back then, I was proud of being the guy who noticed details. I remembered how she took her coffee, how she hated silence in the morning, how she needed to talk through decisions before making them. I thought that part of me was permanent. I didn't notice when it started fading. The change was slow, like rust. My job got bigger, louder, and more demanding. I came home with numbers in my head and deadlines in my mouth. When she spoke, I nodded without hearing. When she cried, I hugged her without asking why. I learned how to solve problems, not how to sit with them. She would say, "I just need you to listen," and I would say, "I am listening," while checking emails over her shoulder. One evening, she told me she was scared about her father's test results. I gave her statistics from a medical website and said worrying wouldn't help. She stared at me like I had spoken another language. "I didn't ask for data," she said. "I asked for you." I laughed it off, told her she was tired. Later that night, I heard her crying in the bathroom and stayed in bed, telling myself she needed space. Months passed in that pattern. Her words turned shorter. My patience turned thinner. We started talking like coworkers, not like people who loved each other. If she complained, I called it negativity. If she went quiet, I called it peace. I convinced myself that stability was the same as happiness. The first time she said she felt lonely with me in the room, I felt offended. I listed everything I provided: the rent, the car, the future I was building. I asked how she could feel alone when I was right there. She said, "You're here, but you're not with me." I told her she was being unfair. That was the beginning of the end, even though I didn't know it yet. She tried in ways I misunderstood. She planned dinners with no phones. She left notes on the fridge asking how my day really was. She sent me long messages about her fears and hopes. I skimmed them like memos and replied with one-word answers. I thought love was durable enough to survive neglect. I thought silence meant things were fine. The last real conversation we had was a week before she left. She asked if I was still in love with her. I said of course, without looking up from my laptop. She waited for more, for proof, for something alive. I didn't notice the pause. I only noticed when she stood up and said, "You don't even hear the question anymore." On the day she packed, she moved quietly, like a guest. I kept telling myself she was just cooling off. When I finally looked at her, really looked, her face was already gone from me. Not angry, not crying, just finished. She said she had been talking to me for years, and I had been listening to a version of her that was easier to manage. Now the apartment is full of sounds I ignored: the hum of the fridge, the echo of my own steps. I replay every moment I chose being right over being present. I thought losing her would feel like a sudden accident. It feels more like realizing the house has been on fire for a long time, and I kept adjusting the thermostat. I lost her the day I stopped listening. I just didn't know it yet. After she left, people asked what happened like it was a single event, a fight or a betrayal they could understand. I told them we grew apart. That was easier than saying I had been present and absent at the same time. The first week alone felt temporary. I slept on my side of the bed and left her side untouched, as if she might return and need the space. Her mug stayed by the sink. Her jacket still hung by the door. I treated the apartment like a paused movie. She didn't block me. That almost hurt more. I sent messages I should have sent years earlier. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize. Can we talk?" Hours passed between her replies. When she did answer, her words were careful, like she was handling something fragile. "I don't know what there is to say," she wrote. "I already said it." I started replaying old conversations in my head, trying to find the moment I could undo. I remembered her telling me about a coworker who listened to her complain for an entire lunch break. I had rolled my eyes and said people who complained that much were exhausting. She had gone quiet after that. I thought she agreed with me. Now I wondered if she had been warning me. I told myself I would change. I read articles about communication, about emotional availability. I practiced responses in the mirror that sounded patient and open. I imagined her sitting across from me, surprised by the new version of me. The fantasy always ended with her smiling and saying it was all she ever wanted. I never imagined her saying it was too late. We met for coffee 2 weeks later. She looked lighter, like she had set down something heavy. I asked how she was. She said, better. That word felt like a verdict. I launched into everything I had learned about listening, about not interrupting, about validating feelings. I spoke for 10 minutes without stopping. When I finished, she said, "You're doing it again." I didn't understand. She said I was still talking about myself, about what I would do, instead of asking what she needed now. I asked then. I asked what she needed. She thought for a long time before answering. "I need to feel safe being honest," she said. "And I don't with you. You turn everything into a problem to fix or an argument to win." I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to explain that I only wanted to help. I swallowed it and nodded. It felt like learning a new language too late to use it. She told me she had been grieving our relationship while still inside it. That by the time she left, she had already said goodbye in her head. I tried to picture her doing that quietly while I sat next to her scrolling through my phone. The image made my chest feel hollow. I asked if there was someone else. She said no, and I believed her. "I left because I was disappearing," she said. I started thinking maybe I just didn't have feelings anymore. Then I realized I still did. They just had nowhere to go. I told her I loved her. She said, "I know. But love without listening feels like a closed room." After that, we didn't meet again. Our messages became polite updates, then rare check-ins, then silence. I stopped seeing her jacket as a promise and started seeing it as evidence. I packed it into a box with the rest of her things and left it by the door for a week before I could carry it out. I thought the pain would fade once the apartment changed, once the routines broke. Instead, it followed me into every conversation. I noticed how often I waited for my turn to speak, how often I heard only what confirmed what I already believed. Losing her didn't make me better right away. It made me aware. Some nights, I imagined the life we could have had if I had listened when it mattered. Not with techniques or rules, but with the kind of attention that says the other person exists fully in front of you. I don't imagine winning her back. I imagine being someone she wouldn't have had to leave. The awareness didn't come with redemption. It came with discomfort. I started hearing myself the way she must have heard me, jumping in with solutions, turning feelings into debates, shrinking moments into bullet points. At work, people called me efficient. At home, efficiency had sounded like dismissal. I wondered how many times she had tried to tell me something important and hit a wall of my own confidence. I went through our old messages one night, scrolling back to when we still wrote in paragraphs. Her words were full of small observations about her day, about things that scared her or made her laugh. My replies slowly turned into acknowledgments instead of answers. "That's tough. You'll be fine. We'll handle it." I had mistaken certainty for care. 3 months after she left, I ran into her at the grocery store. It was the kind of accident you think about afterward for hours. She was standing in the produce aisle, comparing two kinds of apples like it was a serious decision. She looked up and smiled, surprised but not startled. We said each other's names like they were objects we had set down and found again. We talked about harmless things. Weather, work, a new place she had moved into. She said she liked how quiet it was. I told her I had started cooking more because I hated eating alone. She asked what I made. I started explaining the recipe in detail and saw her eyes drift, just slightly. I stopped mid-sentence. "Sorry," I said. "You didn't ask for the instructions." She smiled at that. It was the first time I felt like I was catching myself instead of being caught. We walked to the checkout together. The silence between us wasn't hostile, but it wasn't empty either. I wanted to ask her if she missed me. I wanted to ask if she ever thought about coming back. I didn't. Instead, I asked how she was really doing. She considered the question and said, "I'm learning how to talk without preparing for a fight." I knew she wasn't just talking about other people. At the door, she hesitated. "I'm glad you're trying," she said. "I just wish it hadn't taken losing me." I nodded because anything else would have been another argument. She walked out with her bag of apples and didn't look back. After that, I paid attention in ways that felt unnatural at first. When my sister complained about her marriage, I didn't jump to defend her husband or suggest therapy. I let her finish. When a friend told me he was scared about money, I didn't tell him he'd be fine. I asked what scared him most. The conversations slowed down. They also went deeper. It felt like discovering a room in a house I had lived in for years without opening the door. Still, every lesson seemed to arrive with her name attached to it. I would hear her voice when someone said they felt ignored. I would see her face when someone waited for me to respond, and I didn't know how. The change felt real, but it felt useless without her there to see it. I wrote her a letter and didn't send it. In it, I explained how I finally understood what she meant about being invisible, how listening wasn't about agreeing or fixing, but about making space, how I was sorry for every time I chose comfort over curiosity. I folded it and put it in a drawer because an apology that asks for nothing back is harder to give than one that hopes for forgiveness. Some nights, I imagined knocking on her door and saying all of it out loud. I imagined her letting me in, sitting across from me, and talking the way we used to. In the fantasy, I listened perfectly. In reality, I stayed home. I didn't trust myself to want the right thing. I didn't know if I wanted her back or just wanted to prove I could be different. What I did know was that the silence between us was honest. It was the result of years of not hearing her until there was nothing left to say. Time did what it always does. It made the story easier to tell and harder to change. By the fourth month, people stopped checking on me. My routines grew new edges. I woke up earlier. I ran in the mornings because the apartment felt too quiet before sunrise. I told myself movement was progress. Some days it was just noise. I started seeing someone, not because I was ready, but because loneliness looks like courage when you dress it up. Her name was Elena. She laughed easily and asked direct questions. On our first date, she told me about a bad breakup and how she didn't want to repeat old patterns. I nodded like a student who had studied the material. When she spoke, I waited. When she paused, I asked what she meant. It worked. She said she felt heard. The word landed between us like a test I wanted to pass. But listening when there is no history is simple. There is no weight on the sentences yet. The trouble started when she talked about things that frightened her. One night, she said she worried she would never feel safe depending on someone again. I felt the familiar itch to reassure, to make it smaller. I told her she was overthinking. I watched her close off like a door I recognized. I apologized quickly, slower than I should have been. We tried again. I practiced the version of myself I had been building. It held for a while. Then the cracks showed. When she described her anxiety, I summarized it like a report. When she asked for time together, I negotiated like it was a contract. She asked me once if I liked who she was or if I just liked being needed. I didn't answer right away. The pause said enough. After she left my place that night, I realized I was reenacting a smaller version of the same ending. Not dramatic, not cruel, just the steady erosion of attention. I sent her a message saying I wasn't ready for what she wanted. She replied with relief. I thought it was just me, she wrote. It wasn't. That week, my mother called. She had always liked my ex. She asked if we were still talking. I said no. She said, "You know, she used to tell me you were kind. Not always present, but kind." I held the phone and felt the strange comfort of being described accurately. Kind without listening is a safe way to be wrong. I went back to the letter in the drawer and added a page. This time I wrote about Elena, about how patterns travel even when you change addresses. I wrote about fear disguised as efficiency. I wrote about how listening requires the courage to be changed by what you hear. 2 weeks later, I got a message from my ex. It wasn't an invitation. It was practical. She had found a box of my old notebooks in her storage unit and asked if I wanted them. We met in a parking lot in the afternoon, neutral ground. She handed me the box like a package from a previous life. We stood there with nothing urgent to say. I told her about the running. She told me about a class she was taking. We avoided the obvious until it stepped between us anyway. Are you happier? I asked. She didn't answer quickly. I'm clearer, she said. Happier comes and goes. I wanted to tell her about Elena and the letter and the room I had found in myself. I didn't. Instead, I said, I think I finally understand what you meant. She looked at me with something like caution and something like relief. Understanding isn't the same as doing, she said, but it's a start. We said goodbye without promises. As she drove away, I felt the urge to chase what used to be ours. I let the urge pass. Wanting her back wasn't proof of growth. Letting her go might be. The notebooks stayed in their box for a long time. I told myself I would read them when I felt ready, like they contained instructions I could follow backward. One night, after a long run that left my legs burning and my head empty, I opened the box and sat on the floor. The pages smelled like dust and old coffee. Most of them were work notes and half-finished ideas. Then I found entries about her. They were full of confidence. Plans for trips we would take. Arguments I thought I had won. Lines about how she worried too much and how I would help her see things clearly. I read them slowly, the way you read a stranger's diary. I saw myself explaining her feelings instead of asking about them. I saw how often I wrote, "She'll understand," without ever checking if she did. There was one entry from a year before she left. I had written that she seemed distant lately and that I should probably talk to her, but that things would calm down once work settled. I closed the notebook and felt the familiar twist of wanting a different ending to a finished sentence. The next week, my sister invited me to dinner. She and her husband were arguing when I arrived, quietly but sharply, about something small that carried something larger. I took off my coat and waited for the moment to pass. It didn't. My sister asked what I thought. I started to answer with advice. I stopped. I asked her what she needed from him right then. She blinked like the question had come from a different direction. "To hear me," she said. Her husband looked at her, then at me. The room changed its temperature. Later, in the kitchen, my sister said, "You're different." I didn't know if that was praise or observation. It felt like both. I thought about how change doesn't announce itself. It only shows up when something old tries to repeat and fails. I went on a few more dates after that, but I didn't try to fit myself into someone else's expectations. I told people what I was working on. Some of them liked it. Some of them didn't. The ones who didn't save me time. The ones who stayed asked questions I couldn't answer quickly. That felt honest. One evening, while washing dishes, I caught myself waiting for a voice from the other room that wasn't there. The habit of her presence still lived in the apartment. I realized I had been treating memory like a contract, like something that still obligated her to me. It didn't. Memory was just evidence. I wrote her another letter, this one shorter. I didn't talk about what I had learned. I told her I hoped the quiet place she lived in still felt like relief. I told her I was trying to become someone who listened without preparing a response. I didn't ask her to read it. I didn't ask her to answer. I sealed it and put it with the first one. Weeks passed. The seasons shifted in small ways I used to miss. I noticed them now because there was space to notice. The city sounded different when I wasn't racing through it. People did too. I found myself collecting their words instead of stacking mine on top of them. I understood then that losing her wasn't the lesson. The lesson was what I did with the echo she left behind. I couldn't turn back the day I stopped listening, but I could hear the next person who stood in front of me and asked to be seen. Some nights, I still imagine her asking if I love her. I imagine looking up this time. Not to say it, but to show it in the way I wait for her to finish speaking. The fantasy doesn't end with her coming back. It ends with me staying where I am, present enough to know what I'm doing when I choose to stay or go. I didn't expect to hear from her again. Life had settled into a quieter shape, one that didn't demand explanations. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday, her name appeared on my phone. No preface, no apology. Just a question. "Do you still have the blue scarf I left?" I stared at it longer than I should have. The scarf was in the back of my closet, folded inside a box I hadn't opened in months. I had kept it the way you keep something fragile, not because you plan to use it, but because throwing it away feels like erasing proof. I told her I did. She asked if she could pick it up after work. She arrived just before sunset. The light in the hallway made her look softer, less guarded. We stood awkwardly while I searched for the box like I didn't know exactly where it was. When I handed her the scarf, she smiled in a way that felt familiar and distant at the same time. "I forgot how much I liked this," she said. We didn't talk about why she came in. She sat at the edge of the couch like a visitor. I made tea out of habit. We drank it slowly, as if speed might lead somewhere dangerous. She looked around the apartment and said it seemed calmer. I said it was because there was less arguing. I didn't add that there was also less laughter. She told me about her class, about a woman she had become friends with, about how she had started walking everywhere instead of driving. I listened, not like a performance, just like someone who didn't want to miss a sentence. When she finished, I waited. The waiting felt like work, but it also felt right. "You seem different," she said. Quieter. "I'm trying to hear things before I answer," I said. It sounded rehearsed, even though it wasn't. She nodded, as if that made sense to her now in a way it never had before. We reached the part neither of us named. The space where old feelings live. She looked at her cup and said, "I used to think if I explained myself better, you would understand." I didn't interrupt. She went on, "Now I think you just weren't ready to hear it." I told her I was sorry again, not with reasons, not with stories. Just the apology. She said she accepted it. The word landed gently, without ceremony. I realized then how much I had wanted forgiveness to look like reunion. Instead, it looked like closure. She stood to leave. At the door, she hesitated. I'm glad you learned this, she said. I just wish I hadn't been the cost. I watched her walk down the hall, carrying the scarf like something newly useful. When the door closed, I didn't feel the sharpness I expected. I felt a clean kind of sadness, the kind that doesn't argue with reality. That night, I opened the drawer with the letters. I added one more page, not for her, but for myself. I wrote that listening is not something you master. It is something you choose every day, especially when it would be easier to speak. I wrote that love doesn't disappear when people leave. It changes shape into whatever lesson they leave behind. I went to bed without imagining another version of the evening. I didn't picture her staying. I pictured myself asking better questions in the future. I understood then that the moment I stopped listening had taken something from me, but it had also given me something I couldn't have learned any other way. The loss was permanent. The change didn't have to be. A year passed without anything dramatic happening, and that was the point. My life didn't rebuild itself around a revelation. It adjusted in small, ordinary ways. I learned to pause before responding. I learned to ask questions that didn't lead anywhere except deeper into what the other person meant. The world didn't reward me for it. It just felt more real. I met someone in a bookstore. Her name was Mara. We reached for the same novel and laughed in the quiet way people do when they don't want to be noticed. We talked about why we like stories where nothing explodes, but everything changes. It felt safe to say that. It felt like an introduction to how I wanted to live. On our third date, she told me about her divorce. She said it had ended because they stopped talking about anything that mattered. I felt the old instinct rise up, the urge to show her how different I was now. I didn't. I asked what that silence had felt like. She looked at me for a long moment before answering. Like being alone with someone, she said. I knew exactly what she meant. I didn't tell her why. We built something slowly. There were no speeches about growth. There were just evenings where we sat on the floor and ate takeout and talked until the food went cold. When she was upset, I didn't search for solutions first. I learned how to sit with discomfort without trying to turn it into a plan. Sometimes she asked for advice. Sometimes she didn't. The difference mattered. One night, months in, she said, "You really listen." It wasn't a compliment the way people usually mean it. It sounded more like a statement of fact. I felt proud of it and afraid of it. Proud because I had changed. Afraid because I knew how easily habits return when you stop paying attention. I never told her about the exact moment I lost someone by not listening. I only told her that I had learned too late once, and that I didn't want to learn that way again. She didn't ask for details. She trusted the behavior more than the explanation. I understood then why words alone had never been enough before. Sometimes, when the apartment is quiet, I still think about the woman who taught me this by leaving. I don't picture her face as much as I picture her waiting for me to answer a question I didn't hear. I imagine the sound of her voice saying she felt invisible. I don't feel crushed by it anymore. I feel instructed by it. I used to believe that love ended when people walked away. Now I think it ends earlier, in the moments when you stop being curious about the person standing in front of you. I didn't lose her because she stopped loving me. I lost her because I stopped listening to who she was becoming. The difference between then and now is simple. When someone speaks, I don't prepare my response while they're still talking. I let their words land before I decide what mine should be. It feels slower. It also feels like respect. If I could go back to that night in the kitchen, arguing with a voicemail, I wouldn't say anything brilliant. I wouldn't promise to change. I would ask her what she meant and wait for the answer. I can't go back, but I can do that now, with the person in front of me, with the voice that hasn't learned to stop asking yet. I lost her the day I stopped listening. I found myself the day I started.